So I'm doing a 1901 reading project where I'm reading stuff around 1901. At the moment, I'm reading I have read The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle, that was published in 1901. And there's this one thing that leapt out at me as I was reading The Hound of the Baskervilles. Just at the very beginning, there's a mention by the doctor who's come to Watson and to Holmes to enlist their aid in helping them figure out what the hell's going on with the Baskerville family and this hound that seems to have be hunting them. It's a curse of the Hound of the Baskervilles. And he says, "Oh, well, I've come to you because you're the second greatest expert in all Europe." And he says, like, "Well, who's the first expert?" And he says, "Bertillon." And it's like, Bertillon. So I looked that up. And Bertillon is Alphonse Bertillon, a French police officer operating around that turn of the century. Also a biometrics researcher. He came up with the idea of how are we going to identify criminals, and he came up with the idea of the mugshot, of doing various measurements on people. Also was into kind of various forensic things, like making casts of footprints or ballistics, stuff like that. So somebody who was really involved at the start of modern policing and modern policing techniques. So you think, oh, well, this is why he's referred to this guy. This is sort of the police Sherlock Holmes, but the real guy. But that's not really what big thing he's known for. The big thing he's known for is he testified as a handwriting expert, which he is not an expert in, was not an expert in, at the Dreyfus trials. Testified at two of them, which resulted in Alfred Dreyfus, a French officer accused of passing secrets to the Germans. It resulted in Dreyfus getting convicted, and this became the great cause célèbre. Zola penned "J'accuse" in support of Dreyfus, that he was being railroaded. Jewish officer had faced tons of anti-Semitism in his career and was railroaded. This was a false conviction. And indeed, it seems that, from what I can tell so far, I have not gone into it too deeply, Bertillon was maybe pressured into giving this false testimony. Came up with this torturous kind of thing of like how this document that was found in a waste paper basket was actually Dreyfus masking his own handwriting, and just it was judged, it got reviewed and basically discredited as just scientifically unsound and just completely bogus. And it's just like, it's this interesting little detail in a story that you can tell from the clues in the story. Holmes invites Watson to an opera at the very end, which, if you track down the actual performer, who is another real person, that he was in London performing this in like 1893 season. And 1893 is a year earlier than when the Dreyfus affair took off, what started. Basically they didn't twig into kind of that there was treason going on. Turned out to be another fellow until like a year later. So it's just like one of these little interesting details of dropping a name like that into a story set in 1893, but written and published in 1901, while we're still in the midst of the Dreyfus affair. It doesn't sort of finally get resolved until like 1906, where Dreyfus is exonerated, ends up back in the French army and stuff like that. It's just like it's just like this little kind of detail that I find fascinating, and is one of these things I'm going to read about the Dreyfus Affair. I think Barbara Tuchman, in her book The Proud Tower, I think she has a chapter on the Dreyfus Affair, and I've already found like one book by, I think it's Ruth Harris, that I'm going to read about Dreyfus in. So I'm curious. I'm curious about that. I don't know all the details or what, but it's just like this little nugget in what you might consider kind of a fairly timeless Sherlock Holmes story about this expert, this somebody who's using science for police work, but in the real life gave false testimony, or just inexpert testimony under the guise of being an expert in this kind of what is the great fantasy that is Sherlock Holmes, the perfect deductive detective who just uses facts and um, is laser focused on the truth, not necessarily the justice, but the truth. So, yeah, yeah, I thought that was just this interesting mix in there. And you know, I know that Arthur Conan Doyle himself had lots of weird beliefs. There's also mentions of phrenology in The Hound of the Baskervilles. He was apparently into phrenology. He was into spiritualism. He was into lots of weird stuff, which always sits against Sherlock Holmes. But in some ways, Sherlock Holmes is another fantasy that we have, and one that's a very popular fantasy that we want to believe in. But lies against some kind of dangerous fantasies and beliefs and prejudice that we also carry around, and that we're definitely bubbling away under the surface. Anti-Semitism, racism, all that kind of boiling stew that was happening at this point in history and was going to erupt into the 20th century. You know, this is that time when things are just like vibrating. At least that's my theory at the moment. I'm probably speaking out of my ass, but I'm looking forward to reading more into this time, and seeing if I can come back to this at some point. All right, that's what I've got for right now. More videos later.